let's get started. Thank you all so much for joining today's webinar on Conceptualizing a National Geospatial Software Institute. I'm Xiaowen Wang. I'm a professor of geography and geographic information science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm also directing UIUC's CyberGIS Center for Advanced Digital and Spatial Studies. Most relevantly to today's webinar, I'm the principal investigator for this National Science Foundation project to conceptualize Geospatial Software Institute, GSI, as a long-term hub of excellence to serve diverse research and education communities. One of the key deliverables of this project is a strategic plan for the potential GSI, the draft of which the project has produced is available from the link on this slide. You click there, you will get to a PDF document. The second link on this slide is a Google Doc for today's webinar to gather your questions, comments, and inputs to help us improve and refine this strategic plan draft. So feel free to type your notes and thoughts into the Google Doc. You could get to from the second link, bibly link GSI-strategic plan on this slide. The project has a steering committee leading the execution of the NSF project. Some of the members of the steering committee also joining today's webinar. I'm going to call the names of the members of the steering committee to ask for brief introductions, including your name, institution, primary interest, or field. I'll start with Dan Katz, who's in the room. You can speak, it's fine.
Okay, hi. So Dan Katz, I'm here at Illinois and interested in software and in particular how we make software more sustainable and how we use that to build communities around software.
Thanks, Dan, and also Anand.
Hi, I'm Anand Padmanabhan. I'm a senior research scientist here in the Department of Geography and GIS Science, and my interest is bridging GIS with cyberinfrastructure and advanced cyberinfrastructure ecosystems.
And also Dr. Mike Goodchild. Mike, are you on the call?
Yes, I am. I'm in Seattle. I'm Mike Goodchild, Emeritus Professor of Geography at UC Santa Barbara, and also have other affiliations. But I've been associated with the project from the beginning and attended all three of the workshops and been very much part of the discussion today.
Thank you very much for the brief introductions. The project has an advisory committee, including a group of distinguished scholars and leaders. A couple of advisory committee members are joining today's webinar as well. Do we have Victoria Stoughton on the call? I know Victoria's traveling, so she's perhaps just getting deplaned somewhere. How about George Percival?
Yes, Shawan. Yeah, this is George Percival. I serve as a CTO and Chief Engineer of the Open Geospatial Consortium. Concerns with partnerships and community building around geospatial, around innovation standards, that kind of thing. Similar kind of interests in this project.
Thanks, George. We're expecting Victoria to come to this room later in this webinar. We have also invited a group of community representatives as speakers on today's webinar. And I'll start with Professor Will Barley in the room.
Hey, my name is Will Barley. I'm a professor in the Department of Communication here at the University of Illinois. I'm a social scientist who studies collaboration and teams in interdisciplinary science.
Thanks, Will. And Kalina.
Hey, I'm Kalina Borkiewicz. I'm a programmer in the Advanced Visualization Lab at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, where I do data visualization for public outreach.
Thanks. Colleen, are you on the webinar?
I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Colleen. I'm a senior geography researcher at the American Association of Geographers. I've been here for 2 years. My main interests here are particularly about education around using geospatial data properly and ethics, challenges around ethics.
Thanks, Colleen. And Ned.
Hi, my name is Ned English. I'm a senior research methodologist here at NORC at the University of Chicago, where we do social science research in the public interest, and I run our GIS team here. And my background is in social science applications of GIS.
Thanks, Ned. Eric?
Hi, yeah, I'm Eric Shook. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Geography and Environment Society at University of Minnesota. My research really focuses also on the intersection of geospatial, GIS science, and cyber infrastructure.
Thanks, Eric. Diana?
Thanks, everyone. My name's Diana Sinton. I'm the Executive Director of the University Consortium for Geographic Information Science. I'm interested in all of these questions and activities, especially with regards to how we can develop and sustain these activities in higher education.
Thanks, Diana. Carol?
Hi, my name is Carol Song with Purdue University. I'm part of the Rosen Center for Advanced Computing. I'm a senior scientist here. I lead a group developing advanced cyber infrastructures, including geospatial data infrastructure.
Thanks, Carol. Lastly, but not the least, David.
Hi, I'm David Tarbott, and I'm director of the Utah Water Research Laboratory here at Utah State University. I do work on hydrologic information systems such as Kuhazi HydroShare, and also on hydrologic terrain analysis. And those areas are converging in the modeling of flood inundation. I'll be talking a little bit about that later on.
Thanks, Dave. And many thanks to all the speakers joining today, contributing to this webinar. And the NSF project we're reporting progress on is funded by this program, CSSI. And there are 3 existing software institutes funded by this program. One is focused on molecular sciences, another one is high-energy physics. The third one is in the broader context of advanced cyber infrastructure focused on science gateways. And each one of those software institutes is supposed to receive funding at the level of $20 million on average for the initial 5 years. And our conceptualization project is focused on the geospatial data and the software. And I'm likely preaching the choir here for geospatial data. We all understand it's extremely complex, has the characteristics summarized on this slide, posing tremendous computational and scientific challenges. And one of the challenges we learned from the community activities is there are many applications interested to bring different kinds of geospatial data together for solving cross-cutting problems, and there's no easy existing ways to enable such geospatial data integration. And such challenges, both in terms of the computational as well as the scientific aspects, are manifested and reflected in geospatial software, because the geosoftware is for transforming geospatial data into information, knowledge, and intelligence. And it's also for fusion of rapidly changing multidisciplinary sciences and technologies. Based on extensive community feedback and inputs, we have derived the mission of GSI, that is to transform geospatial software, cyber infrastructure, and data science across many fields to revolutionize diverse discovery and innovation by enhancing computational transparency and reproducibility. The vision of GSI should be a sustainable social and technical ecosystem to enable geospatial-inspired innovation and discovery. There are 5 key goals of GSI have been identified. Without going into the details at the high level, the number 1 is reproducible, transparent, and scalable geospatial software. The second one is the geospatial digital workforce. That's absolutely needed, urgently required to advance scientific problem solving in many fields. And also the creation of ethical and open geospatial software ecosystem. And the fourth one the structured guidance for computational reproducibility, and the contributions of high performance and data intensive geospatial software to the national cyber infrastructure ecosystem. We'll get into the details of these goals as we unfold the rest of the presentation. The broad context of GSI's mission, vision, and goals can be summarized by this diagram. You see these two-way interactions between advanced cyber infrastructure and a variety of sciences and applications from the top. And we see the need of critical spatial thinking coming out of the applications and the sciences, serving important guiding roles for the innovation of advanced cyber infrastructure. And we also see the momentum and the importance of advanced cyber infrastructure to conduct extreme digital transformation of a variety of fields. And what's between the science drivers and advanced cyber infrastructure is the emergence and the rapid development of geospatial data science and the CyberGIS. We will elaborate later in the presentation. And there are a number of challenges, both from the scientific point of view and the societal aspects. They're not necessarily situated in any single scientific field and disciplines, but rather cross-cutting, where geospatial data and the software serve as critical bridges. And increasingly, analysis, modeling, and observation approaches need to be brought together, revolving around geospatial data and software. And this broad context and the importance of scientific and societal challenges are matching quite well with 6 of 10 of NSF big ideas, such as harnessing the data revolution and growing the convergence research. Our conceptualization process so far has conducted 3 types of activities. Number 1 is a set of workshops, 3 of those, and a community survey and a summer school. We will get through these activities and provide high-level summaries. The 3 workshops were conducted to engage as broadly as possible community participants and the leaders and representatives. We have issued open calls to diverse and broad communities and receive a large number of submissions of position papers and accepted 76 of those position papers scattered across 3 workshops. The first workshop was focused on mission and the vision of GSI, which we just briefly shared. And the second workshop focused on use cases and core capabilities of GSI. And the third workshop focused on strategic plan and governance of GSI. And you could access all of these position papers from the links on this slide. And we also conducted a community survey, inviting my colleagues sitting in the room here, Professor Will Barley, to discuss this community survey.
Hi, thanks, Xiaowen. So we augmented the workshops with a community survey, the purpose of which was trying to capture as many different voices as possible from the community of geospatial software users. If you'll advance the next slide. This is the team that worked on the survey. Becky Vanderwall has been mentioned yet, but she's awesome. She's played a central role in organizing this. The purpose of the survey was 3 things. One was to figure out how people used current geospatial software, what were their current uses and practices, what were the perceived gaps and challenges that they perceived with the tools that they were currently using, and to do our best to see if we could start to understand what were some of the opportunities that they saw could be afforded if those gaps were to be addressed. We designed and piloted a survey here through the collaboration of these partners and piloting with key members of the community. We distributed the survey using Qualtrics and to a number of community listservs, including the AAG, Agile, CryoList, CyberGIS, ACM SIG Spatial, Exceed, and several others. We had a full sample of participation of 454 participants. If you go to the next slide. I'm going to give you a couple of quick snapshots of findings. We can't go into all the details here, but this is a word cloud illustrating the self-identified field of our respondents. And one of the things you'll notice is confirmation here of the vast diversity of fields from which people identify folks who use geospatial software. And so this, I think, is one of the key characteristics of this community. We see a lot of natural sciences here. We also see a diversity in tools, ranging from open source to proprietary tools, as well as a majority of our users saying they use some sort of Google technology on their platforms. We dove more deeply into findings. One of the key findings is that a large minority perceive their work as being limited by their geospatial software in some sort of patterned way. Also importantly, a majority of our users are still working on their laptops or personal computers, which means that while moves towards scaling computing is important, we need to keep in mind that most people are still working on small-scale computing platforms. In terms of challenges that folks experience with their software, we see patterns with data integration, interoperability between different software tools, tools' capacity to handle large or finely detailed data sets, a desire for better access to communities to find new and latest and greatest technologies and to be able to use them, as well as a desire for increased support for modeling and simulation. And alongside these, we saw very concrete and recurring statements from folks about how, if we were to address these issues, folks would be able to ask interesting questions they wanted to answer in their sciences. And we have more details about that if you want to ask about them from us, yes.
Thanks, Will. We also conducted a summer school. This was co-organized by the American Association of Geographers and the University Consortium for Geographical Information Science and the UIUC's CyberGIS Center for Advanced Digital and Spatial Studies. The focus of the summer school was on reproducible problem solving with CyberGIS and geospatial data science. So this is a picture of the participants all smiling at the beginning of the summer school. And we have quite a strong crowd coming from all over the places in the country. And the summer school was hosted at UIUC. And this is the introduction to one of the keynote speakers, Dr. Victoria Stoughton, who I hope will be joining us soon. She's addressing computational reproducibility, and she was also part of this recent National Academy of Sciences consensus study report. She was on the committee. And there are two goals of GSI centered around computational reproducibility. And I'll leave this to be addressed by her and move this through first. Oh, let's ask if Victoria's on the call. Victoria, are you on? Not yet. Okay, so Victoria said she will be here in 10 minutes?
At least join.
Okay, join, okay. Yeah, so we could come back to this, but very briefly, we think it's important for GSI to enable researchers to harness the geospatial data revolution for discovery and innovation by combining geospatial software and data and scale in reproducible and transparent ways. And it's important to provide structured guidance for computational reproducibility to broad geospatial communities and to have communities who have dependence on geospatial software benefit from such structured guidance. Now I'm inviting Diana Sinton, the Executive Director of UCGIS, to address geospatial digital workforce.
Thank you, Xiaowen. You've heard a little bit about the week-long summer school that was held at UIUC in July 2019. It's the second such one that the CyberGIS Center has hosted in collaboration with UCGIS and other partner organizations. Events and experiences like these are superb examples of designed experiences for our current and future geospatial digital workforce. In these situations, each team's workflow was slightly different based on their unique problem scenarios, but all the teams were taking advantage of CyberGIS capabilities while they implemented best practices of geospatial data science. The primary deliverables for every team was a collaboratively produced Jupyter notebook whose content details the solutions that the teams reached to their different respective problems. But importantly, we designed each week to include the elements and components that reflect the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are now and will continue to be unambiguous expectations of our geospatial digital workforce. For now, this has meant introducing these individual students in the summer schools to the skill sets around interdisciplinary teamwork and geocomputational thinking, working with big data, and scaling up the ways that they can think about deconstructing the problems so that they know where to start. We cannot make assumptions about how important scaffolding will be to support the geospatial digital workforce going forward. These experiences are not ones that that students are independent agents that they can come up with the competence and confidence to do on their own. So we feel that this is things like the summer school are important components of supporting that workforce going forward.
Thanks, Diana. And for the next, for ethical and open geospatial software, I'm inviting Colleen Doney to address this important aspect.
Hi, everyone. So this is another picture of the AAG-UCGIS Summer School, which took place at UIUC last summer. In my role here at the AAG as a researcher, I've been trying to wrap my arms around challenges across our membership of geographers. One of the challenges are the issues associated with the use and collection of geospatial data. When you think about using and collecting geospatial data, the overwhelming amount of these data are now being collected by researchers, citizens, government agencies, or private companies without necessarily asking for expertise from geographers anymore. So the use and collection of this type of information is going to continue with or without the know-how of geographers, but we do have a responsibility and leading role to play, particularly in terms of the longstanding expertise geographers built in terms of ethical standards and practices using and collecting these data. So the third goal of the GSI is to promote a culture of ethical and open geospatial software driven by diverse communities. So an additional component to that is to cultivate collaborative practices across disciplines, which is not easy. But there's hope. This picture that you see in the slide is a photo taken during the summer school, where collaborative practices have been tested there. Across, there were people from across disciplines, different levels of technical expertise, and they were able to pull off solving certain problems. So this third goal of the GSI is about cultivating such collaborative practices with a foundation of inclusive and ethical standards. So in here, I'm actually presenting there with Jungwon Kim at UIUC on the development of guidelines for mapping data that are confidential or sensitive. So the GSI is going to look at these issues around ethics and collaborative practices.
Thank you, Colleen. Now, we've visited the mission and vision and the goals through the concrete activities GSI has conducted, and the community have come up with this organization structure and governance model, given the diversity of activities as well as the communities, the breadth and depth of the communities in their scientific work. We think it's important to have a holistic and productive organization structure and governance model. In this picture, you see there are 5 key focus areas identified under the leadership of executive committee. So the 5 focus areas including science drivers, core capabilities and services, education, workforce development, evaluation, sustainability, and outreach and partnerships. So the rest of the presentation will cover each of these 5 areas separately and also in an integrated fashion. And the executive committee is composed of different leadership positions, such as the PI is expected to serve as the executive director of the institute, also deputy director, may be served by a co-PI, and the lead focus areas will be included as part of the executive committee. Importantly, there should be an advisory board that interacts regularly with executive committee and providing advice and inputs gathered from the diverse communities this advisory board need to represent. So next, we're going to talk about science drivers, one of the 5 key focus areas. There are 2 types of science drivers. One is geospatial-centric. If you got a chance to look at the strategic plan draft, you will see some concrete examples of these 2 types of science drivers. The other types is domain-centric science drivers. I think the GSI is well situated to bring these 2 types of science drivers together in a synergistic fashion, tackling the scientific and the societal challenges we were alluded to earlier. But importantly is to bring the 3 different scientific paradigms centered on analysis and observation modeling approaches together, revolving around geospatial data and the software. With this big picture in mind, I'm inviting Mike to speak about principles of engaging science drivers. Mike.
Thanks, Xiaowen. I want to talk about a number of principles which I think, and I'm talking here, of course, from the experience of the 3 workshops, should guide our engagement with science drivers. In other words, this is the interface between the GSI and the various sciences which it hopes to serve. And so the first of these is the principle that the central focus of GSI should be and must be on advancing science. And referring back to Xiaowen's previous slide, this can be data-centric, so it can explore new sources of data. It can be tool-centric, so it can be focused on developing new tools or coordinating the development of new tools. It can also be concerned with asking new questions, because I think the fastest way you advance science is to think about the new kinds of questions that are feasible, that you can ask given the new sources of data, new tools. And then finally, I think that one role of GSI has to be in fostering new collaborations. It has to be in building relationships between different sciences, because in my view, very often that is where the need for geospatial technology actually lies. It's one thing for a science internally to devise its own policies and procedures, but it's a quite different thing for a science to interact with other sciences and find ways of collaborating. So this is seeing geospatial software at the interface between the sciences and concerned with many of the activities that occur when you have to interface sciences. So it's concerned with integrating data, with conflating data from different sources, with fusing data from different sources, and doing this with a common language. And of course, many people have recognized over the years that geospatial technology provides an excellent common language for collaboration. So this is a point I think we need to emphasize very, very strongly, that the language of geospatial software enables collaboration between the sciences and enables convergence in that term. Third principle, we should be concerned with all sciences, with integrating across all sciences. And this means integrating across the social sciences, the environmental sciences, and the interface between them. So human dimensions of environmental issues. And then I think it would be a mistake to forget that many applications of geospatial technology actually involve design. They are captured in this concept of geodesign, which has been emphasized very strongly over the past 15 years or so. But they also occur in the interface with the humanities. And there's some very productive interactions which can potentially occur between geospatial technologies and the humanities. And then finally with business and with industry. I think GSI needs to be concerned with adding value to interactions. So acting, if you like, almost as a dating service, a go-to group for enabling collaboration between different sciences. I think it needs to be on top of GI science, all the GI science issues, modifiable aerial units, spatial uncertainty, spatial dependence, spatial heterogeneity, and it needs to concern itself with enhancing access to data and software. And then finally, I think the final principle, which has got a little bit lost on the bottom of my screen, but that's all right. This is the idea that the GSI is the leading edge. It's the go-to group to discover what is new in geospatial technology and what those novelties, those novel issues may lead into in the way of collaboration between sciences. So those are 5 suggestions for principles on which we can engage between GSI and the various sciences. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. With that, I'm inviting Ned English from Newark University, Chicago to address social science drivers as some examples.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming this afternoon. I wanted to speak to how the GSI specifically and how GIS in general can be applied to the social sciences as distinct from the physical sciences. And I would say there are really 3 common social science applications at NORC where, for those who aren't aware, where our bread and butter has been doing data collection or social science research surveys, economic surveys, health surveys, education surveys, and the like, and related analyses. A lot of what we use geographic information systems and technology for is to contextualize the data we have. And so to associate some area level demographic or environmental information that would enrich another data set. That is, do people exposed to certain social or environmental things, do they exhibit some other trait or do they exhibit some other attitude? Common examples are from federal sources like the American Community Survey or the Current Population Survey, but also from, say, EPA raster data or EPA environmental information. Beyond the whole process of contextualization or data linkage, there's considerable custom data, geographic data creation, and address data processing that are part of what we do in the social sciences. However, today I'll speak to a use case where we wanted to enrich collected survey data with extant environmental data at a very fine resolution. Next slide, please. This is the chart or Chicago Health and Activity Space in Real-Time survey, and very briefly collected real-time location information from a set of older adults in the city of Chicago. But you might have heard of the Array of Things project at Argonne National Laboratory that set up sensors around the city of Chicago to collect high-resolution environmental data. And our motivation was, can we use the latter to enrich the former? If you turn to the next slide, we showed a picture of what these sensors actually look like. There are hundreds of these currently around the city of Chicago collecting a particulate matter, other air pollutant information, a temperature and humidity, and some of the newer sensors are collecting data like sound and imagery. So you could say, do people understand where traffic counts are higher or if individuals exposed to higher levels of stress? If you turn to the next slide, you can see the diverse array of data collected by both the chart survey itself, that is biomeasure information, social network information, and behavioral data, in addition to individuals reporting on their own health statuses, with the array of things that collects the noise pollution, air pollution information, etc. The challenge for us is how do we link this information together? Because if the sensors are collecting, say, particulate matter at 2-minute intervals every day throughout the year, what's the right unit of aggregation both at the temporal and spatial scales? If you turn to the next slide, you'll see how the map on the left shows the neighborhoods highlighted in black where we collected individual information, and we know, say, if an individual reported poor health, physical health, or poor mental health, or reported having lung or pulmonary conditions, we would like to relate them to the pollution they're exposed to from the sensors on the right. The map on the right shows where these sensors are, and it becomes a real data compilation and aggregation question for all of us of what's the appropriate way to link these together. If you turn to the next slide, we can illustrate, we don't have enough time to describe our results really, but our preliminary results have shown that there's a real correlation between some of the environmental data and individuals' self-reported health. The challenges, some of which can be addressed partially by the GSI, are how to link these together. What data are important? It requires some expertise to understand which of the variables collected by an array of things would be expected to impact somebody, in addition to the complexity of nearly infinite time and spatial components. Looking forward, we haven't begun to analyze the GPS data collected through the chart data, but considering how an individual travels and where they go during the day, how can that impact their long-term health outcome? And really how the microenvironment impacts the activity spaces of older adults. So that's just a very brief overview of some of the cutting-edge social science research that could be helped or assisted through the GSI.
Thanks, Ned. That was a really interesting, as a social science driver case. Now I'm inviting Dave Tarbolton to address this example of empowering hydro-geospatial research through integrated data analytic and modeling capability. Dave, take over.
Thanks, Xiaowen. So I'll describe some of the work and where geospatial capability has helped with continental scale flood inundation modeling, and that's going to touch on some of the data and tool-centric concepts that were spoken about, as well as the concept of collaborations, which I think is really important. So flooding occurs when the water depth is greater than the height above the nearest drainage. As that picture might show, you can think of a stream bed. Normally the water is fairly shallow, but when it gets to be above perhaps your house, the flood depth is greater than the height above nearest drainage, then there's a problem, and you need to be able to model that as well as look at the geospatial aspects of that. So if we go on to the next slide, it should show this is the approach for doing that at a continental scale. So taking from a single river up to the continent, the National Water Center is operating the National Water Model that produces discharge at every one of many thousands of stream reaches. From that, you can transform the discharge to depth using a rating curve or some sort of hydraulic model. Then once you're given the depth and given the digital elevation model evaluation of the height each grid cell is in the area that drains to a particular reach above that drainage, you can model areas that are inundated and the depth to which they're inundated, and then you can assess impact on people and property. So this is a integration bringing together convergence of information from many sources. So go to the next slide. So David Maidment was really the inspiration for this, and this is what he said at a talk back in at the CyberGIS All Hands meeting in 2015, where the evaluation of flow and height above nearest drainage over the continent using supercomputing he called a major success for the nation. So if we go on to the next slide, this gives a little bit about what was done, and I guess we followed up on that after that initial work that David Maidment was lauding. There is a terrain-aligned stream raster that's been calculated based on the National Hydrography data set. There's the National Elevation data set, breaking the country into each 6-digit hydrologic unit catchment, and then doing parallel processing on the Roger supercomputer. The height above nearest drainage was effectively calculated in this map for the whole US produced. The picture at the top just shows the concept of the relative elevation being the height above nearest drainage, and that was reported in a paper published in the American Water Resources Association Journal. So if you go on to the next slide, now we think about how can people actually do this sort of work, and this gets back to what was mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of people still doing work on their desktops. Do you or do our students, our researchers in general, have the know-how to take advantage of the sort of advanced computing that was needed to get that work done? To do the work that was shown required actually engaging with some of Xiaowen's team that had hands-on with the supercomputer, and it was inaccessible to some people like me without that help. So there's a bit of a digital divide as I'm putting it here, and we need cyber infrastructure gateways to enable for non-specialists the capability to do this sort of thing. So on the next slide, I'm going to show some of the work that we've been advancing to try and help with this, and really just by way of illustration, and this is going to connect HydroShare, which is the quasi-hydrologic information system for collaboration that I'm leading the development of with Jupyter Hub capability, in this case CyberGIS Jupyter Hub, for doing this sort of analysis, or effectively providing a gateway for this sort of analysis. So on the left is HydroShare, which is comprised of a website, web applications which perform actions on the sort of resources that are stored in HydroShare, and it enables through web application connectivity capability to launch into any server, and in this case it was a server that was running CyberGIS Jupyter, through the sort of open with button. So at the resource landing page in top right, you can click open with CyberGIS Jupyter for water, and then it'll take you into a Jupyter notebook that's documented the sequence of steps you have to do, and you can go through doing things like calculating height above nearest drainage, helping with reproducibility of the work, we touched on that earlier, pre-configuring the dependencies, scaling the analytics, and that helps transcend the local PC limitations and evolve towards a more fully web-based innovation environment where our science can be advanced. So that was my bit. I think Xiaowen will talk next about some of how this is actually done.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, for the technical how-to details, this paper provides the underlying mechanisms and architecture for the implementation of CyberGIS Jupyter. This is just for a reference to follow up with the scientific case Dave presented. But more broadly speaking, related to the digital divide, CyberGIS for the past decade was envisioned and developed to bring together high-performance computing approaches, big data to knowledge transformation, and visualization and high-fidelity visual analytics, together with the collaborative problem solving, driving the frontiers of geospatial theories, principles, methods, and capabilities. So this is essentially the earlier version of CyberGIS was quite matched to the digital divide challenge Dave was alluded to. And thanks to NSF, CyberGIS made a major stride in the software context in the years of 2010 to 2017 with partnership across a group of academic institutions, industry, and government labs, and agency. And the result of that NSF-supported work is a collection of CyberGIS software modalities built on top of advanced cyber infrastructure, including, for example, Roger mentioned by Dave, which essentially is a geospatial supercomputer first of its kind, tailored to geospatial data handling and problem solving, as well as Exceed, which is a national NSF-funded flagship cyber infrastructure environment. now CyberGIS is natively established into this environment. One of the software modalities is referred to as a CyberGIS gateway. Essentially, it's providing CyberGIS capabilities to users who do not have in-depth technical knowledge in CyberGIS or cyber infrastructure. Another modality is referred to as a CyberGIS toolkit, which includes a collection of open source modules, software codes that are directly able to harness the computational power provisioned by advanced cyber infrastructure and high-performance computing resources. So this picture shows the progress made in the past decade or so from there was literally nothing between advanced cyber infrastructure and a variety of geospatial innovation and discovery applications. Now there's this emerging CyberGIS software environment. And for the CyberGIS gateway, in fact, because of the nature of the gateways for fostering access to advanced cyber infrastructure by a variety of application domains, so there's this global user community currently being cultivated, and the Access CyberGIS gateway. But in the broader context of geospatial data science, this represents the intersections among three domains: geospatial sciences technologies, which is clearly a focus of GSI, but also mathematical statistical sciences and cyber infrastructure and computational sciences. In the middle, we have addressed data science, CyberGIS, and also artificial intelligence is evolving very rapidly. That has to do with ethical open geospatial software needed by the communities to contribute to the evolution of this rapidly evolving AI frontiers connected to geospatial problems. But at the core of this intersection among the knowledge domains representing geospatial data science is the fusion of geospatial knowledge and the computational knowledge at scale. And for advanced cyber infrastructure and high-performance computing, computational scales is a desirable factor. But for geospatial scales, we know it's a complex factor. So the question is, how reproducibility is assessed and assured when the fusion of these two types of knowledge are going to occur in so many different domains? I think GSI is having a lot to contribute here to move the frontiers. A lot of times in the broader communities, people have the perception of code sharing is enough for reproducing each other's work. But throughout the GSI workshops, we learned very quickly we need to move away and beyond code sharing, and there is need for a common platform and even an ecosystem of common platforms for assuring and achieving and making reproducible scientific work possible in many geospatial domains. And as Dave was describing the hand methodology, and this was in the end produced as a Jupyter notebook that could be vetted by a collaboration of experts and researchers and students. And we envision this type of collaborations through this kind of technical approach should and could be scaled to much broader scientific communities, and associated to this scaling in a collaboration sense, there's a lot to be done, and GSI need to make contributions in this particular regard. And from the technical side, this is a summary of the CyberGIS Jupyter architecture, and you see from the left is the user environment, and from the right on this slide is the cyber infrastructure environment, and what's between is tying these two together, and you see scientific workflows and geospatial problem representations are moving through between these two ends. And if we put this into a broader context of technical ecosystem, you see the capabilities and the services GSI is positioned to offer and provision to the communities is really sandwiched between a variety of communities and science domains and the rapidly evolving advanced CI capabilities. And to navigate through this broad context of services and capabilities as a both social and technical ecosystem, education and workforce is critical. Now I'm inviting Eric Shuk to address this important element.
Yeah, thank you, Shawan. So yeah, so education is really the bedrock of academia, where we're taking our new knowledge and discoveries from something like GSI and sharing them with others. And there's really 3 points that I want to make with respect to education and workforce development for GSI. First, education is really part of the sustainability plan, because even as the software may evolve or even go away, the people definitely won't. So our trainings and curriculum that we could create with GSI will have an impact on an entire generation of scientists and practitioners, just like the NCGIA core curriculum did in the 90s for GI science. Second, GI science and the other fields it intersects are really undergoing a radical technological transformation. GSI represents one of the most promising ways for us to be able to transform our curriculum and really shift away in GI science, at least, from the focus on making maps to more toward making software services and infrastructures. And importantly, to Mike's point, to get at new research questions, to provide new capabilities so that we can ask and answer new research questions. And third, education is really a force multiplier. So if we can teach the teachers and train the trainers, as they say, and develop materials for self-learners, we can engage new and diverse communities across not only scientific spectrums, but also institutional, gender, race, socioeconomic spectrums to build a diverse community of practice. And to David's point, really start to bridge that digital divide. So I think that it's a good opportunity for us to reach a number of fields and really expand out.
Thanks, Eric. And the future workforce is going to live in and contribute to advanced CI ecosystem. Now I'm inviting Anand to address this aspect.
Thank you, Shawan. I also wanted to make kind of 3 points in terms of how GSI would be able to work with the advanced cyber infrastructure ecosystem. Firstly, it's, as Mike had mentioned in terms of the science drivers, it's important to engage humanities, social sciences, and other communities which are not really well represented in the national or international cyber infrastructure ecosystem. So GSI can play an important role in kind of bridging this digital divide, which Dave also talked about. The other thing where GSI can make a significant impact on is on the geospatial tools and software itself. So fostering geospatial tools and software, while at the same time making impact and making these services available to communities for solving this complex scientific problem. The focus on GSI, as Mike had mentioned, has to be on solving on solving complex scientific problems, and a GSI, by developing these tools, can enable that. And lastly, the cyber infrastructure ecosystem itself is quite broad and evolving. So GSI can serve a role of integrating these advanced ecosystem and provide educational and broader impacts for the community.
Thanks, Anand. So what GSI could offer to the broader communities with regard to core capabilities and services? Now I'm inviting Carol to speak of core capabilities and services GSI may provide.
Thanks,
Carol?
Shawan. So there are a lot of capabilities that Shawan talked about earlier. I think in the discussion throughout the workshop, we summarized 3 strategies sort of around those where GSI should build their services to ultimately to advance science and also align very closely with all the other areas. So the first one is what I call deep. It's really aimed at helping users to use advanced methods and solve high impact research problems. And so these could be experienced users and novice users alike. And the second strategy is really go wide. So really help, especially the non-traditional communities that haven't been using geospatial data or hasn't been expert in using these to bridge that gap. And also training the next generation researchers and workforce definitely goes in this area as well. The third strategy is really to build services and capabilities around promoting and enabling transparency and reproducibility of geospatial data-driven research. And so this could be very broad, including services such as providing guidance, having the right model, and all three put together. When we come to the design phase, I think a lot of the capabilities in terms of software innovations, new methods, new integrative capabilities, workflows, and so on, those will be fleshed out more.
Thanks, Carol. Now I'm inviting George to address partnerships.
Thanks, Xiaowen. Yeah, this is section 9 in the report. It's actually outreach and partnerships in there. GSI needs to develop connections and partnerships really to achieve the broader impacts and extend outreach efforts to the diverse communities. Really needs to engage with that triple helix of organizations of research, academic, government, as well as industrial and international organizations as well. During the conceptualization phase, we'd already engaged with quite a few partners. You see quite a few listed here from the various industry, government, academic, and international. And the purpose is really the efforts that are needed, kind of twofold for sure already. One is to attract and prepare next generation workforce. And secondly is to communicate the geospatial sciences and raise public awareness to the important GSI, so that in fact two-way communication in these partnerships and outreach.
Thanks, George. Speaking of outreach, now I'm inviting Kalina to discuss outreach.
Thanks, Xiaowen. So another goal is educating the public about the importance of geospatial science and software. So not only reaching people who already know about and are interested in GIS, but casting a wider net to raise exposure, awareness, and interest in the topics. And that can be done through collaborations with museums and science centers, as well as public media like television and film. Next slide, please. So here are some examples that the Advanced Visualization Lab has done in this space. So we've created full dome shows for planetariums, IMAX films, TV and streaming documentaries about these topics that are seen by millions of people. So they really have a broad reach. At the bottom, there's a visualization showing collapsing ice cap in the Arctic from the Arctic DEM data set. So these visualizations are using software. So geospatial software isn't only used for scientific discovery, but also science communication with broader audiences. So it's another important goal for the GSI.
Thanks, Colleen. One of the 5 focus areas is evaluation and the sustainability. Now I'm inviting our colleague Dan Katz to discuss sustainability.
Right, and I guess I'll say first that sustainability is probably one of the more overused words, and it has lots of different meanings. And so I think there's 2 different relevant meanings of sustainability here. So one is sustainability of the things that are produced within the GSI itself, software and other things, other tools. And then the other is sustainability of the GSI as a whole. And I'm going to address the former and not the latter, even though the latter is also something that we will have to worry about. So in terms of the former, the problem that we have is that software collapses if it's not maintained. And by that I mean it will stop working at some point because all of the things underneath it change, the libraries, the operating systems, the platforms. And in addition, there are new needs that come up. There are bugs that are found. And so to make software sustainable, we need to have a set of practices and resources that are both technical and non-technical that allow it to continue to operate as expected in the future. And so the quick version of this is that there's work that needs to be done, and to sustain software, we need enough resources to do that work. And if you think of this then kind of as a balance, you can increase resources to make sure you have enough to do the work, or you can try to decrease the work to make it better fit the resources. And we can address both of these in different ways through GSI activities, and through activities where GSI partners with other institutions and projects that are working in the same space. So just to provide a couple of examples, to increase the resources, we can try to increase available funding. And in order to do that, we need to convince funding agencies that this is something that's important for them to put money into. We need to convince companies that this is something that they should try to contribute to in open source projects. We can help projects find funding by providing opportunities for them, building a catalog of opportunities and kind of doing a matchmaking service there. We can help projects form communities to increase the number of people that are involved in those projects, who are in some sense resources for those projects. And we can encourage people to contribute to the communities. And we do that by things like trying to work with committees that are doing promotion and tenure so that they recognize these facts, recognize software contributions as things that they should take into consideration, for example. And then we can also decrease work. And we do that by removing redundancy, so by having projects being aware of each other and collaborate with each other rather than competing with each other where that makes sense, recognizing that competition is good in circumstances as well. By designing better APIs so that the software that is built is more reusable and is easier to use and takes less work to use. And then by defining and teaching and using best practices, working with software carpentry, for example, and others and other parts of training.
Thanks, Dan. To wrap up, now we're at the top of the hour. I think it's important for GSI to take leadership roles in these 5 regards. The number one is to focus on fundamental scientific and societal challenges, which was resonated a number of times during the course of this presentation, and to prepare the future workforce, bridge the digital divide, foster open collaboration, and enable discovery and innovation. So GSI is well situated to step up for such leadership roles in these regards, and to really tackle this grand opportunity for revolutionizing discovery and innovation across many fields through synergistically advancing geospatial software and the related sciences. So that's a picture after the summer school. They were gone from smiling to cheering for the group of early stage scholars and the students. So if we do GSI at the scale of the entire country to bring the diverse communities together, we're inspired to see sharing like this happening at a bigger scale. To help us get there, this webinar is a part of the conceptualization project, and the recording of the webinar will be available in early January 2020 on the website of the NSF project. And the strategic plan is the link you could get to a Google Doc for contributing your thoughts, your feedback, and any specific suggestions you have for helping us to evolve the strategic plan, improving and refining the plan to get it ready. We expect the strategic plan to be submitted to NSF next spring. And we also have a Twitter hashtag. If you have any thoughts you want to get the broader audience to be aware of, that's clearly a suitable mechanism to do that. So we want to thank NSF for the generous support to bring the communities together. So the first award is the one for supporting the conceptualization project. There's also a number of awards related to the work presented today. And this is the final slide. In addition to the Google Doc, I put my email available on this slide. You could directly get in touch with me if you want to follow up with me on any of the discussions we shared and on any topics related to GSI. So that's the end of the presentation. I know we consumed the entire 1 hour for this presentation. We have a large team and a lot of exciting, interesting thoughts to share with the communities. And now we're open for any questions. I think for much of what we have presented, it's very difficult to get to be very specific within a short time window, but the Google Doc we could use to digest some of your dynamic thoughts. Are any of the team members are looking at the Google Doc while I was speaking? Feel free to chime in to directly address any of the questions or comments made there. But at the same time, if anyone wanna ask questions or contribute comments, please chime in, let us know via chat or any other Zoom technologies you know better than I do to voice up. Okay, that's the final one. So there is a question in the end of the Google Doc that's easy to identify. That is, will you be looking for letters of support or commitment to package with the strategic plan submittal? The answer to that is yes. We would very much appreciate any letters of support or endorsement. We plan to include a set of folks, your names, if you would be comfortable to be included in the strategic plan as you would be endorsing the strategic plan before our submission. So we would very much be appreciative of your endorsement. Please feel free to follow up with me or any of the steering committee members mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. We will make the recording as was the slides. The slides will be available soon in the next few days of the webinar, but the recording itself will also all be available. So feel free to follow up with any one of the steering committee members of the GSI conceptualization project, but feel free to follow up with me as well with regard to letters of support and endorsement.
So just, excuse me, just to follow up on that briefly, because I'm not sure that it's completely clear, the strategic plan is not a proposal.
Right.
Right. So this is not something that we're writing to a solicitation that NSF has. This is a deliverable from the conceptualization project. And our hope is that NSF will open a call for proposals in this area at some point in the future. So signing up to the strategic plan is not really a commitment at this point. In some sense, it's more, it really is more support that you think that this is a good idea and you would like to be involved in something like this.
Thanks, Dan. Any questions you want to ask directly? You could unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yes, a quick question from Dawn Wright at Esri. Wonderful webinar, and thank you for the clarification on the letter of support or the endorsement. Given what Dan has just shared with us, would it be useful to provide a template so that we can endorse the strategic plan in advance of your submission to NSF? And also with said template, that might also assist us in exposing the GSI to other potential partners, such as some of the other potential partners have been noted in the Google Doc. Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn, for that excellent question. Itself also a suggestion. I think it's a great idea to have a template developed. We will make such a template to send to broader communities. That way, once we collect the letters from such a template, we would have a uniform understanding of what the commitment or support means at this stage. So yeah, great suggestion. Thanks again. Any other questions, comments? So there's a question, a technical question maybe I could pick up in the middle of the Google Doc. There was a comment on getting beyond just sharing code Jupyter Notebooks so great with emphasis on workflow sharing and so on. And there's a question after that, GSI should address containerization as well. My short answer is yes. Certainly there are different technical options for containerization, depending upon different technologies. But more importantly, this is related to the reproducibility. We need community-level structured guidance for what needs to be containerized. So it is both a community consensus as well as research in the geospatial context about what is such structured guidance should look like, as well as leveraging the most cutting-edge cloud, virtual machine, containerization technologies so that such guidance could be meaningful and implemented to benefit sciences. Any of the other speakers on the webinar, feel free to pick up any of the comments, questions from the Google Doc and chime in to respond to. Do we have Victoria on the webinar?
Hi, Shawan. Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm here, and I apologize for joining late. I was stuck on the ramp at CMI in a plane. They wouldn't let us off. But as soon as they let us off, I immediately joined. I'm sitting here at the airport, and I caught about the second half of the presentation, and it was really excellent.
Thanks so much. I played as an avatar of you when I was going through the slides.
Great.
So do you want to maybe contribute to some thoughts related to the slides you contributed?
Well, I'm sure you did them justice going over them, Shawan. And again, I apologize for not being able to present them, but I think one of the things that is coming through loud and clear from community engagements and also through ongoing conversations within the leadership on this project is how important notions of computational reproducibility are to folks, and similarly how important developing a sort of path or a roadmap around how to take steps regarding reproducibility is just as important. And so I think, Shawan, when you mentioned the opportunity to develop some structured guidance around this, I think that's exactly right. I don't think that there is any interest in developing some, sort of software picking or sort of workflow, decisions. It's really about trying to understand how people use the tools, how reproducibility can be supported within existing frameworks that people use, and then perhaps even being able to do things through advances, as Shawan discussed, around community platforms and ecosystems of engagement in the technology, how we could actually find gaps or accelerate people's work around reproducibility. So I think this has been sort of the thrust of our thinking, that this is something that can, dovetails exactly to the theme of accelerating the science and the discovery.
Thanks very much. I knew, Victoria, you were supposed to join the call, but there was a flight delay, so it was out of your control. So very much appreciate your.
I'm sorry. I'm
really,
sorry about that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So there's, I'm picking up more questions, but certainly I don't want to dominate the Q&A here. So I will be quiet for a few seconds, just to encourage any others want to chime in to respond to the Google Doc or ask new questions.
Hey, Shawan, it's George. There's a comment, a sub-bullet to organizational structure, asking about connections to commercial, and lists some really good ones. I think the partnerships aspect of that is really important. We were, during the conceptualization phase, able to bring in quite a few commercial organizations and, kind of present some of their activities and the like. And I suspect that if we were to move forward, we would continue that partnerships with commercial activities. The exact extent and mechanism and the like are somewhat TBD, but absolutely, we did that significantly during the conceptualization phase. And unless somebody wants to, say otherwise, I guess, I would think that we seem to have some really good resonance that way across, commercial, government, and of course, academic and research.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. What I could tell related to that is through the community activities of the project, we sensed some common understanding regarding the challenges of bringing proprietary and open source tools together for scientific problem solving. And there's a strong consensus from the engagement activities of GSI conceptualization that is GSI is well suited to bring these different contributors of geospatial software together, either proprietary or open source or otherwise, because right now, broad communities are not getting sufficient knowledge in terms of how to navigate through this complex landscape of geospatial software and tools. And there's a tremendous and urgent need for GSI to step up to bring all these contributors and players together and help the communities to navigate and to do what's best and possible for scientific problem solving and broader impacts associated.
Xiaowen, this is Carol. I'm looking at two questions at the end of the document. I'll chime in a little bit. So one question is, what opportunities will there be for young scholars to contribute to GSI? I would say that during the workshops, I think it was pretty clear that GSI would aspire to be a, from ground up, very much community building, encouraging participation. So I would definitely see many opportunities for energetic young scholars to be part of it, whether it's contributing software or helping others with specific technologies and new methods. I can just see a lot of opportunities.
And I completely agree. I think that's a great comment, Carol. Not only I think young scholars would be expected to get involved in GSI, to take advantage of GSI as opportunities, but also from GSI point of view, there's a consensus that GSI should also have a clear focus on engaging next generation young scholars to prepare them for their cross-cutting research they might be interested to pursue. So it's both ways. Another point I should mention, I saw a few comments related to the governance organization structure. Some are comments, some are maybe questions posed, which is the organizational model. As you sensed from this webinar, the team of presenters coming from different institutions, there were discussions about the governance model of GSI should be a distributed model that would match well with the nature of geospatial software, and the geospatial-related sciences are really pursued and conducted by very diverse communities, and a distributed model of governance is supposed to be optimal and efficient to respond and address the needs requirements from diverse communities practicing and using geospatial software. I think that comment might clarify some comments and a few questions made in the Google Doc. Any other questions, comments? The team members here at Illinois is fully committed to stay in this room for as long as we will become hungry. But there are certainly different time zones. I would allocate maybe another 10 minutes for this webinar, especially for the recording purpose. So if you have questions or comments, suggestions, in general thoughts, feel free to take advantage of the remaining 10 minutes.
Just a couple of quick comments, shall we? First of all, thanks for doing this. Nice work by the entire team, and very good report on where things are. And thank you so much for doing this. A couple of comments. I heard one word about international engagement in George's presentation, but I didn't hear much beyond that. So that is something to think about. What kind of international collaborations could be brought to bear on the overall effort. It would also be good to see how this fits into NSF's EarthCube initiative in terms of what that program is aiming to achieve. And finally, there are efforts in the data infrastructure and software services areas in other agencies such as NOAA, NASA, USGS, and others, all of whom are dealing with the geospatial data in one form or another. So a few thoughts to consider as you update the strategic plan.
Thank you very much, Mohan, for your kind comments and the comments. Could you say, Mohan, your institution, because this is for recording purpose?
Oh yeah, sorry, my apologies. I am Mohan Ramamurthy with Unidata at UCAR in Boulder, Colorado.
Thank you very much, Mohan. Yeah, I think you spoke to the critical parts of the partnerships and outreach. The conceptualization project has done extensive work to engage international communities. Some of us went to conferences at other countries to present the progress of GSI conceptualization, and there are also activities, workshops organized by researchers and communities in other countries addressing similar aspirations and problems GSI is addressing. But clearly, I think we need to organize our strategies in a very focused, targeted fashion to articulate the value added by having international partners and also agency partners. The relationship with the EarthCube is, I think, very important. Some of the work presented without explicitly reference to actually also was funded by EarthCube, based on my understanding. But I think given your leadership experience, Mohan, I think you would also have a lot to contribute for helping us sort out the synergies between what GSI could pursue and achieve and how that would synergize and relate well to what the future of EarthCube will be contextualized as well as be configured to achieve. So I think that me and as well as the GSI conceptualization team would be happy to follow up with you to get your advice and insights. So there's a question toward the end of the Google Doc I will take a stab at, but for our technical experts, feel free to chime in. So someone wants to develop a geospatial software program. How might GSI support the effort, both financially and technically? So this question would be addressed by the need for GSI to have a process in place to accept requests for support by community participants in the broader geospatial context to propose to develop some capabilities, and for GSI to evaluate how such capabilities would contribute to the advanced CI ecosystem for benefiting related sciences. So that question, I think, could be answered by a specific need. GSI should have a process and a mechanism in place for responding to such requests. And if this request would be approved, GSI would need financial, technical resources to support the development of such technical capability. Well, we have 2 minutes left in the webinar. Inviting final comments, final words from anyone on the webinar.
Hi, Xiaowen, it's Colleen. I just wanted to acknowledge the first few comments we got in that Google Doc that mostly relates to ethics. I just added a comment there that, you know, these are all great examples of this need to develop practices around geographic information that center around ethics. So that's part of goal 3 of the GSI. But then there are also comments about hacking and what about private data and all of that, and the right to be forgotten and not be tracked. So this raises some questions around whether a GSI should be leading efforts towards developing also platforms that enable access and analysis to sensitive geospatial data. Where
I noted
the openness of access will be somewhat restricted there.
Yeah, now I see your comments, and I saw the ethics at the beginning of the Google Doc. Thank you for addressing this. I think you did appropriately with the comment you made there. I think overall, in our strategic plan, we need to respond to this important area. And the comments made here would be some really good materials for us to reflect and to make sure we capture the gist of such concerns and suggestions.
If I can add something to that, Xiaowen, and Colleen, thank you for pointing that out. It's I think it's extremely important, and I'm sorry. I think sorry about that. I think some of these issues that are being raised in the comment regarding privacy in geolocation data. These are issues that are being confronted in a number of areas in the community. They're certainly very important, and they do have some connection to reproducibility in the sense of inevitably these will come up, right? As we think about sharing data, or we think about sort of computational traces through workflows that allow people to understand analysis and derivations. And so that's something that I think we can start to incorporate into our thinking as part of the landscape around reproducibility, but there are also separate ethical issues that come up that we will need to consider that wouldn't necessarily come up through discussions around reproducibility. So I think these are two separate issues. However, but I think they're reinforcing in the way that we look at it. So, so what I'm trying to say is I think the approaches that we have towards being able to look at these meta issues around GSI and how it can support the community, I think are well positioned to be able to start to take a look at some of those questions and what it means to start to resolve them, or what those steps might actually look like, what it means, for example, in the international context.
Thanks. Yeah, I completely agree. I think there are two different issues, but they're interrelated. The ethics aspect as well as the reproducibility. In our current draft, we have a clear, I think, emphasis on reproducibility, but we think it would be beneficial to link that to ethics more explicitly and articulate the connections and relationships there. Maybe in the future version of the strategic plan document. All right. We'd love to continue this for a long time, but understand this is perhaps getting late, especially for East Coast people. Thanks so much again for your attendance, for your participation and contributions. Cannot thank you enough, especially before the holiday time, here to be with us today. Happy holidays and have a cheerful new year ahead. And we'll keep you apprised of the evolution of the strategic plan document and our future activities. Thank you all again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
you,
you.
Chauvin.
Bye. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.